Today's video involves a frightening jump scare. It's been a dark shit time lately and we've had to cover some dark shit topics, and I thought this week we'd have a brief respite, a brief bit of sanctuary as we engage in one of my favourite hobbies, whether you like it or not, goading Nintendo fans for no other reason than settling petty years-old grudges. But don't worry.
Oh my god.
While we're being a little bit cheeky, we do have a mildly depressing point at the end to make, I suppose, so we'll be at least on theme somewhat. And if you've got any issues with today's video, if you just feel bad in general, just remember, live your life like the devil in the Nightmare Before Christmas that goes, "It's time to party." I'm not saying Nintendo fans, and by Nintendo fans I mean the overly loyal hardcore type, are the worst fans on earth. I'm not saying Nintendo fans are exclusively tiny and shit. I'm not saying that Nintendo fans are the second most annoyingly spoiled little brats in the game community, beaten out only by status quo warriors who whine and cry into their drippy porridge because a game had a trans boy in it. What I am saying, however, is that in terms of console-branded, frothingly zealous, corporately enthralled fanatics, Nintendos are the ones that annoy me the most. Therefore, I judge them on a highly personal basis that I shall present as objective fact. Thank you. Console fanatics, the kind that have pledged loyalty to a single platform and absolutely lose their shit if they see it or its games criticised, are uniformly pathetic. I've had tumultuous run-ins with them all. The PlayStation worms who demand that every Sony exclusive be called a masterpiece. The Xbox children who are all exclusively under the age of 16. The PC Master Race crowd who I upset by playing Overwatch correctly with a controller the way it was meant to be played. I mean, grow up, mouse and keyboards for casuals, fuck's sake. But Nintendo fans, when it comes to expecting the world to march in lockstep with their opinions on game design and hardware specs, are a special breed of just plain fucking weird. For a platform so full of bright, happy, colourful games, the people most obsessed with playing them are miserable fucking rifles, who are often so pitifully insecure they worry about what I think of them.
It's time to party.
And I don't hate them that much, I just enjoy fucking with them because it's easy to do, and while my enmity is based in some very genuine disgust and past run-ins, don't get me wrong, I don't despise them. Yes, they scream the song that will end the universe when a Zelda game is scored below a 9 out of 10, and yes, some fans furiously think even a 9 out of 10 is too low for a Smash Brothers game, and yes, they might DDoS websites if they don't get their way, and yes, there are fans so pissed off at critics that they remember slights going back a decade that not even I remember, which is totally different from the slights I'm bringing up that I do remember, but they are funny. In a really irritating way. The problem with them is that they troll themselves too easily. They're easy to fool as they've already fooled themselves, but that's not because they're specifically Nintendo fanatics. They're fanatics. Period. And that makes them so gullible as to be delusional. And despite my focusing on them, it's not all that exclusive to them, it's just more noticeable. Any suitably zealous group of fans will build up fantasies in their head that don't match reality. Hello Star Wars fans. Whether they're seeing oppression and bias from people who criticise their favourite games, or building up expectations for an upcoming release to such a wildly excessive degree that the final product will not match the holy grail in their heads. Hello Star Wars fans. The most fascinating situation is when a fan base gets riled up over quite literally nothing. When I say nothing, I mean going off the deep end over something for which there is specifically no evidence. This is separate from being mad about criticism or sobbing over review scores. That's crying over something that means nothing, but isn't literally nothing. The scores and the critique are there, and while it's sad as all fuck to get upset over an 8 out of 10, the 8 out of 10 is at least existent. But what do you do when you're, say, Nintendo itself, and you announce you're hosting a low-key presentation on third-party games, but your fans here that you'll nonetheless have a major mind-blowing reveal. Well, what you do there is you go ahead and do the presentation because that's what you said you were gonna fucking do, and that's what Nintendo did.
It's time to party.
This past week, Nintendo had one of its famous Nintendo Directs, and the company quite specifically told us all that it wouldn't be a massive deal, which it wasn't. It was in fact a very low-key and brief presentation of third-party games, exactly as promised. On 7/20, we'll debut the first Nintendo Direct Mini Partner Showcase, a series focused on titles from our development and publishing partners, explained Nintendo. We'll share a few updates on a small group of previously announced Nintendo Switch games. That's what Nintendo promised, and that's what Nintendo delivered. A few updates on a small group of games we already knew about, and it was fine. Nothing on the Direct really interested me except for one game that was inexplicably left out of the Western presentation and only shown on the Japanese Direct. Why the fuck even do that? It's coming out in the West, so why did Nintendo not think we'd want to see the best fucking thing on the menu? Makes no sense. But anyway, it was a humdrum little Direct, and the fan base couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that a Nintendo Direct wouldn't have something for them to rush to Twitter and babble about with incoherent excitement. They couldn't believe that a video game presentation would just present some video games and leave it at that. They couldn't believe what had happened, and what had happened was exactly what they were told would happen. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that something wasn't catering exclusively to them and their need for excitement. That this time there would be no surprises, no reveals, no world premieres. So imagine how dejected and disillusioned Nintendo's most ardent fans were when they went into that Direct expecting a new Metroid, or FZero, or Breath of the Wild 2 footage, or whatever it is they dreamed up in their naive little heads, and instead only got to see DLC for Cadence of Hyrule, a rather generic third-person shooter, some Shin Megami Tensei, and this hilariously off-putting WWE game in which wrestlers are fed to sharks, which is something Vince McMahon would absolutely do if he could get away with it. In fact, if you replace the sharks with a big bucket of COVID-19, that's exactly what Vince McMahon is doing to his WWE superstars at the moment. Anyway, none of that is what Nintendo's obsessive hardcores want. They want Metroid or F-Zero or Breath of the Wild 2. That's what people who think every Nintendo game is perfect want, and instead they got other things. Things they weren't interested in. And it's not the first time a low-key Nintendo presentation has distressed the Nintendo faithful in this way. Only a few weeks beforehand, Nintendo had to run some hype-quashing damage control to reel in expectations after the announcement of a Nintendo Treehouse show featuring a new game from developer WayForward. As a prominent developer with a history of interesting partnerships and surprising gameplay takes on existing properties, WayForward carries with it a natural air of intrigue. So when Nintendo said this Treehouse, not typically a show for big announcements to begin with, would feature a first reveal and gameplay for a title in a franchise new to developer WayForward, well, you know how that went down already, right? New Metroid? New WarioWare? New F-Zero? No. WayForward, contrary to the wild and near instantaneous fantasizing from the audience, was not working on something so astounding. And Nintendo was savvy enough to realize that the anticipation was quickly getting out of control. In response to the excessive speculation, the company made a follow-up announcement to declare that WayForward's game was based on a third-party property. Cue the retching disappointment. This very year of 2020 kicked off with Nintendo fans being disappointed, building themselves up for a Smash Bros. Direct that only served to let them down. And as the months have gone on, I do get it. COVID-19 has made the game industry slower than usual, and this has affected Japanese studios quite a lot. There's not a great deal of news, not a massive cycle of hype this year. And generally, I think that should be considered a good thing. But we're certainly seeing what happens when people suffer from hype withdrawal. The problem is as old as time. People build things up too much and then get let down. It's just that this year they're feeling the end result ever more keenly because there's nothing else to look forward to. And Nintendo fans, as ever they do, provide the perfect examples.
It's time to party.
This is an unfortunate pattern with the Nintendo showcases, and one that Nintendo seems to be trying to break. By peppering in these small-scale directs and treehouses, the company appears to be trying to manage the runaway assumptions its fanbase has with every otherwise unassuming announcement. And that's an unenviable task, perhaps an impossible one. In a world where Nintendo fans are so easy to troll, you only have to start a fake FZero Twitter account to get them to look at porn. Oh, that happened, by the way, also quite recently. A pair of new Twitter accounts were uncovered and shared around the community. One with the handle Super Mario 35th, and the other FZero JP. With Mario's 35th anniversary this year and fans starved for a new FZero game, all the tools were provided for fantasy to take root. And when I say tools, I'm talking about the people so desperate to be excited for something that they believe these accounts to be official even though the person who found them in the first place said up front there is a high likelihood of them being fake. Which they were, by the way. Obviously they were fake. But the fanatics wouldn't hear of it. There was no evidence of officiality, no reason to suspect they were genuine at all, and they'd already been given actual cause to regard them as fake. But faith is called faith for a reason, and all too many believers were ready to see what compelling and jaw-dropping news the shiny fresh FZero account had for us. And it had news. Oh yes, it had news. And this is what the news was. Nintendo fans, you gotta stop falling for this shit. But, in a way, who could blame them? Because that is what we're all used to, the one more thing effect. The idea that even the most unassuming of press conferences will save some hype for the closing moments, something to make you salivate, something to have you clicking that pre-order button as swiftly as a light itself. Hype is, of course, a major problem in the game industry overall. The marketing machine is designed to lie, manipulate, and sometimes straight up hoodwink people in the name of pre-orders, and it's very good at what it does. It has several billions of dollars worth of people fooled. So fooled, in fact, that they are fully capable of fooling themselves without provocation. Then again, I say we can't blame Nintendo fanatics, but they are a group so desperate to feel oppressed over video games that they'll believe I gave Super Mario Odyssey a 7 out of 10, even though there was no trace of a review. I'd stopped doing reviews quite famously by that point, and the only evidence they had to go on was a poorly photoshopped Metacritic image. Now, all of that was sufficient enough to get mad enough to attack me en masse, even though, once again, they'd trolled themselves. Because they'd wanted so desperately to believe that someone was out to get them and the video game they'd already decided was perfect. But that's all part and parcel of the hype problem as well, not just the petulant expectation of 9s and 10s out of 10, but the expectation that someone inevitably won't march in lockstep, and that someone must be harassed and hounded and put in their place as an example of what happens to anyone who doesn't justify their pre-excitement for a commercial product. It's the same shit show of a cycle I've seen since I started writing about games in 2006, and it's honestly only gotten worse. Ubisoft spent decades covering up for physical and mental abusers. You could write an entire book about the issues of hype in the video game industry. In fact, I could write a book about the long-standing issues of hype in the game industry, but I can't be bothered, so I won't. Thank God for me.
It's time to party. 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 It's time to party.